The steel table is cold beneath my gloved hands. February air cuts through the morgue like a blade, and the fluorescent lights above me flicker once, twice, then settle into their usual sterile hum. I've performed over 11,000 autopsies in my career. 11,000 bodies, each with their story written in tissue and bone. But standing here now, staring at the birthmark on this woman's left shoulder blade, a crescent moon with 3 distinct freckles forming a constellation beside it, I feel my hands begin to shake for the first time in 37 years. It's identical. Perfectly, impossibly identical. I step back from the table. The body bag rustles slightly, just the settling of fabric, the release of trapped air, but in the silence of this room, it sounds like a whisper. Like someone trying to speak through layers of plastic in death. I'm alone down here. I'm always alone down here at 3 in the morning. That's when they bring in the overdoses, the suicides, the bodies found in apartments after neighbors complain about the smell. That's when they bring me the cases no one else wants to touch. The birthmark. Christ, the birthmark. I'd forced myself to look again. Same crescent shape. Same 3 freckles. Same location, precisely measured, 4 inches below the acromion process, 2 inches medial to the scapular spine. I know these measurements because I've measured them before. On myself. In mirrors, in photographs, in the obsessive documentation of a man who spent his childhood being told he was supposed to be a twin. Something shifts in my peripheral vision, a shadow moving where no shadow should move. I don't turn my head. Not yet. In the morgue, you learn quickly that some movements are better left unacknowledged. The dead settle. Buildings creak. Minds play tricks when exhaustion sets in. But this isn't that. This is something else. The fluorescent above my head flickers again, and in that stuttering light, I see the woman's hand. It hasn't moved. Of course it hasn't moved. But there's condensation forming on her fingertips now, small beads of moisture that shouldn't exist on skin that's been refrigerated for 6 hours. I watch one droplet slide down her index finger, across the ligature marks on her wrist, old scars, healed years ago, and pool on the stainless steel beneath. I need you to do something for me. I need you to subscribe to this channel. Not because I want your metrics or your engagement or whatever term they're using now for human attention commodified into data. I need you to subscribe because I need to know someone else is hearing this. I need to know that when I speak these words into the darkness of this room, they're reaching someone, somewhere, who can bear witness to what I'm about to tell you. Because what happened next, what I discovered in the next 3 minutes, is something I should have reported. Should have documented, should have walked away from entirely. But I didn't. The condensation is spreading now. Not melting, the body temperature is still 34 degrees Fahrenheit. I checked it myself, but forming anyway, defying every law of thermodynamics I learned in medical school. It's creating patterns on her skin. Whorls and spirals that almost look deliberate, almost look like writing. I pick up my scalpel. Standard Y incision protocol. Clavicle to sternum, sternum to pubis. But my hands won't stop shaking, and in the reflection of the blade, I can see my own eyes, bloodshot, exhausted, haunted by something I haven't even fully processed yet. The birthmark stares at me from her shoulder, an accusation written in melanin and memory. My mother told me once, when I was 7 years old and asking questions about baby pictures that never existed, that I had a twin sister who died at birth. Stillborn, she said. Gone before she ever drew breath. They never told me her name. Never showed me a death certificate. Never let me visit a grave because there wasn't one, just a cremation, quick and quiet, the way people handled grief in 1967. They wanted to move forward, my mother said. They wanted to focus on the child who lived. But sometimes, late at night, I would hear her crying. My mother. saying a name I could never quite make out through the walls. Saying it like a prayer or a confession or an apology to someone who couldn't answer back. The scalpel hovers above the woman's sternum. Jane Doe, the intake form says. Found in a hotel bathroom on Morrison Street, needles still in her arm, no identification, no phone, no one who loved her enough to file a missing persons report. Just another overdose in a city that collects them like rain collects in gutters. I've seen 200 this year alone. Fentanyl, mostly. Sometimes heroin cut with xylazine. Sometimes just despair crystallized into powder and dissolved into veins that couldn't carry hope anymore. But this woman, this body in front of me, she's different. And not just because of the birthmark. There's a smell. Underneath the standard Morgue cocktail of formaldehyde, refrigeration, and decay, there's something else. Something familiar. It's the smell of my mother's perfume. White shoulders. They stopped making it 20 years ago, but I've recognized it anywhere because it's the smell of childhood, of being held after nightmares, of being told everything would be alright even when my mother's eyes said she was lying. The lights flicker again. The shadow in the corner grows longer. And somewhere in the ventilation system, in the hum of industrial air handlers and the whisper of filtered air, I hear something that might be my name. The Morgue County General is older than I am. Built in 1952, back when they still believed in high ceilings and tile work that could be hosed down after particularly difficult cases. The walls are pale green, institutional green, the color of prisons and mental hospitals and places where hope goes to wait for paperwork. During the day, when the forensic teams are here, when the cops are dropping off evidence bags and the death investigators are arguing about jurisdiction, it almost feels normal. Almost feels like just another job in just another building in just another city where people die and someone has to figure out why. But at night, when everyone else goes home to families and pets and lives that don't smell like death, the morgue becomes something else entirely. The acoustics change. Every sound echoes differently in the absence of living voices. The refrigeration units hum lower, their compressors cycling through mechanical dreams. The stainless steel tables seem to absorb the fluorescent light rather than reflect it, turning from silver to something closer to charcoal in the darkness beyond the examination area. I've worked here for 37 years, and I still can't shake the feeling that the building itself is breathing when no one else is around to hear it. I keep the lights bright in my examination room, all 4 overhead panels at full power, but they never quite reach the corners. There are shadows here that have nothing to do with the absence of light. Shadows that seem to have weight and texture and something almost like intention. I've learned to ignore them mostly. In the morgue, you see things that aren't quite there. The mind fills in gaps, creates patterns from randomness, sees faces in water stains and hears voices in the settling of old pipes. But tonight, with this woman on my table and that birthmark screaming at me from her shoulder, ignoring feels impossible. I set down the scalpel. Protocol says I should have started the incision 5 minutes ago. Protocol says I should be documenting preliminary observations, photographing the body from standard angles, collecting trace evidence from under her fingernails. But instead, I'm standing here with my gloved hands pressed flat against the table's edge, trying to remember how to breathe like a rational human being instead of a man losing his grip on reality. The intake paperwork is minimal. Approximate age, 38 to 42. Height, 5'7". Weight, 112 pounds. Distinguishing marks, track marks on both arms, bruising consistent with recent intravenous drug use, ligature scars on wrists indicating previous self-harm, birthmark on left shoulder blade. Cause of death, suspected opioid overdose pending toxicology. Identity, unknown. I'm 45 years old. If my twin sister had lived, she would be 45 years old. I turn away from the table and walk to the sink. The water runs cold for 30 seconds before the hot kicks in, and I scrub my hands even though I'm already wearing gloves, scrubbing like I can wash away the thought that's taking root in my mind, the impossible thought that keeps growing despite every rational objection I can manufacture. The morgue has 6 refrigerated compartments along the north wall. 4 of them are occupied tonight. An elderly man who died in his sleep, already autopsied, waiting for his daughter to finish fighting with the funeral home about costs. A car accident victim missing most of his skull, scheduled for examination tomorrow morning. A suicide by hanging, already processed, waiting for the county crematory to pick him up. And 1 empty drawer, waiting for the next body. The compressors kick on with a mechanical groan. It's a sound I've heard 10,000 times, but tonight it raises the hair on my arms. Tonight it sounds less like machinery and more like something large and patient, stirring from sleep. I return to the table. The woman's face is turned slightly to the left, and I can see the track marks on her neck now. She'd been running out of veins, moved to the jugular out of desperation. It's a sign of late-stage addiction, the kind where the body has become nothing more than a delivery system for the next high. I've seen it before. I'll see it again. In this city, in this morgue, addiction is as reliable as gravity. But her face. Christ, her face. I've been avoiding looking directly at it, focusing on clinical details, on measurements and observations that let me pretend this is just another case. But now, forcing myself to really see her, I notice things that make my chest tighten. The shape of her jaw, the spacing of her eyes, the particular way her left eyebrow arches slightly higher than her right. I pull out my phone, against protocol, but protocol abandoned me the moment I saw that birthmark, and I open the photo gallery. There's a picture of my mother from 1980, one of the few I keep. She's standing in our backyard, 40 years old, tired but smiling. I hold the phone up next to the woman's face. The resemblance isn't exact. This woman's face is harder, worn by years of substance abuse and street living. Her skin has the grayish tint of poor circulation and worse nutrition. But the underlying architecture is there. The genetic blueprint. The family resemblance that can't be hidden by time or trauma or death. My hand is shaking again. I set the phone down on the instrument tray, and it clatters against the steel with a sound that seems too loud, too sharp, too much like an accusation. There's a logical explanation. There has to be. Maybe this is a cousin I never knew about. Some distant relative from my father's side, the side he never talked about, the Irish Catholics from Boston who cut him off when he married a Protestant. Maybe the birthmark is just coincidence. They're not that rare, crescent-shaped nevi with satellite freckles. Maybe I'm seeing resemblances because I want to see them, because after 11,000 bodies, I'm finally cracking under the weight of all that death. Maybe I should call someone. Another medical examiner. A supervisor. Someone who can look at this woman with fresh eyes and tell me I'm being ridiculous, that I'm seeing ghosts where there's only an overdose victim who happened to have a birthmark vaguely similar to mine. But I don't move toward the phone, because there's something else. Something I noticed when I first unzipped the body bag but couldn't quite process until now. She's wearing a necklace. Simple gold chain, thin enough that I almost missed it. And hanging from that chain is a small pendant, a St. Christopher medal, patron saint of travelers. The exact same medal my mother wore every day of her life until she died. I reach for it, and my gloved fingers close around the medal. It's still slightly warm. Body heat dissipates slowly, even hours after death, but this feels different. This feels like the warmth of something recently held, recently touched by living hands. I turn it over. On the back, there's an engraving. The letters are small, worn smooth by decades of wear, but I can still make them out. To my little wanderer. Come home safe. My mother's name was Margaret. We called her Maggie. The pendant slips from my fingers and falls back against the woman's chest with a soft clink. I step back from the table. The room tilts slightly, just exhaustion, just low blood sugar, just the accumulated weight of too many nights alone in this place, but it feels like something more. It feels like the ground shifting beneath me, like reality adjusting itself to accommodate something that shouldn't exist. The fluorescent lights flicker. Once, twice, 3 times in rapid succession, and in the stuttering illumination, I see, or think I see, the woman's chest move. Not breathing. Not the random twitching of dead muscles settling, but a deliberate expansion as if her lungs were filling with air that has no source. Then the lights stabilize, and she's still again. Perfectly still. Dead as she was when they brought her in. I'm losing my mind. That's the rational explanation. 37 years of this work, of cutting open bodies and reading trauma written in tissue, of being the last person to touch the dead before they're burned or buried or donated to science, it's finally broken something in my brain. I'm having a psychotic episode. A dissociative fugue. Something with a medical name and a pharmaceutical solution. But the metal is real. The birthmark is real. The resemblance to my mother is real. And somewhere in the back of my mind, in the place where I buried all the questions I was never allowed to ask, a memory surfaces. I'm 7 years old. I'm supposed to be asleep, but I'm standing at the top of the stairs in our old house on Maple Street, and I can hear my parents arguing in the kitchen below. My father's voice, "You can't keep doing this to yourself, Maggie. She's gone. You have to let her go." My mother's voice, "I gave her away. Do you understand? I didn't bury her. I gave her away." My father, "You made the right choice. We weren't ready. We could barely take care of one baby, let alone 2. My mother, she's out there somewhere. She's alive, and she's out there, and she doesn't know I exist." 7-year-old me didn't understand. I thought they were talking about a pet, maybe. A dog we had to give to another family. It wasn't until years later, piecing together fragments of overheard conversations and my mother's crying jags and the way she'd stare at pregnant women in grocery stores with something like hunger in her eyes, that I realized they were talking about my twin. Not stillborn. Not dead. Given up for adoption. I walk to the morgue's filing cabinet and pull out the intake photos. They were taken when the body arrived, standard protocol, documenting the state of the deceased before examination. I spread them across the counter and forced myself to look at each one. Full body, front view. The track marks. The bruising. The emaciation of long-term addiction. Full body, back view. The birthmark. Clear and undeniable. Close-up of the face. Eyes closed, jaw slack, the cruel piece of death after years of living hell. And one photo I almost miss. Close-up of the right wrist. Focused on the ligature scars. But visible in the corner of the frame, partially obscured by the body bag, is a tattoo. Small. Black ink faded to blue-green. Located on the inside of her forearm, just below the elbow crease. I lean closer. The tattoo is simple. Just a word. Script font. 6 letters. Marcus. The room goes silent. Not quiet, silent. The refrigeration units stop humming. The ventilation system stops cycling. Even the fluorescent lights seem to dim, as if the building itself is holding its breath, waiting to see what I'll do next. I don't remember walking back to the table, but suddenly I'm there, standing over her, and I'm pulling her right arm out from under the sheet, turning it so I can see that tattoo in better light. The letters are there. Marcus. My name. Inscribed in her skin. In ink and pain and some desperate attempt at connection. She knew my name, She knew who I was, and I never knew she existed. The lights flicker again, and this time they don't stabilize. They pulse, slow and rhythmic, like a heartbeat. Like the building itself is alive and trying to tell me something. The shadows in the corners grow longer, reaching across the floor toward the examination table. The smell of my mother's perfume gets stronger, mixing with formaldehyde and death until I can't tell where one ends and the other begins. I should leave. I should walk out of this room, lock the door behind me, call my supervisor, and tell them I can't complete this autopsy. Personal conflict. Mental health crisis. Whatever excuse will get me out of here without losing my license. But my feet won't move. My hands won't unclench from the edge of the table. Because if I leave now, I'll never know. I'll spend the rest of my life wondering if this woman, this dead stranger with my birthmark and my mother's necklace and my name tattooed on her arm, was really my sister. The twin I was told died before she could live. The shadow in the corner moves again. This time I turn to look at it directly. And for just a moment, just a fraction of a second in that flickering light, it has a shape. A human shape. Small, feminine, watching me with eyes I can almost feel. Then the lights stabilize, and there's nothing there but empty space and old tile. But I heard something. Just before the lights came back to full brightness, I heard something that might have been a voice. Soft, barely audible, less a sound than a vibration in the air itself. It said, "Brother." I spent my childhood in the spaces between what my parents said and what they meant. In the silences that followed my questions about baby pictures that didn't exist, about why I didn't have cousins on my father's side, about why my mother would sometimes stare at me with an expression that looked like grief wearing the mask of love. Children are archaeologists of their own history, digging through the layers of adult half-truths and protective lies, trying to find the bedrock of who they really are. I learned early that some questions made my mother cry, so I stopped asking them. I learned that my father's anger had a specific quality when I pushed too hard about family history. So I stopped pushing. I became the good son, the quiet one, the one who did his homework and got straight A's and went to medical school like they wanted and never, ever asked why there was a locked box in the back of my mother's closet that she thought I didn't know about. The morgue taught me that secrets have weight. They accumulate in tissue, in bone, in the spaces between cells. Every body I've ever examined carried secrets, infidelities written in specific patterns of bruising, addictions recorded in liver pathology, abuse documented in fracture lines that healed wrong. The dead can't lie. Their bodies tell the truth even when their mouths can't. But standing here now, looking at this woman who might be my sister, I realize I've become exactly what I always hated. I've become the keeper of secrets. The one who knows truths he's not supposed to tell. The one who cuts open bodies and reads their stories and then files reports that say natural causes or accident or undetermined because sometimes the truth is more dangerous than the lie. I perform the Y incision. My hands have stopped shaking. That's the thing about medical training. It creates pathways in your brain so deep that you can operate on autopilot even when your conscious mind is screaming. Scalpel through skin, through subcutaneous fat, down to the muscle. The body opens beneath my blade like it's been waiting for this, like death is just another kind of permission. The internal examination reveals what I expected. Pulmonary edema, her lungs are heavy with fluid, the classic presentation of opioid overdose. Dilated cardiomyopathy, her heart is enlarged, weakened by years of stimulant abuse. Hepatic steatosis, her liver is fatty, mottled, beginning to fail. These are the physical signatures of addiction, the way the body records its own slow destruction. But there's something else. Something that doesn't fit the standard narrative of an overdose death. Her stomach contents. When I open her stomach and examine what she ate in her final hours, I find partially digested pills. Not narcotics. Antihistamines. Large doses. Mixed with alcohol. The classic combination for someone who wanted to sleep and never wake up. This wasn't an accidental overdose. This was intentional. This was suicide that looked like just another overdose statistic. I collect samples, label them, document everything according to protocol. But my mind is elsewhere. I'm thinking about the necklace, about the tattoo, about the fact that she came to this city, my city, and died in a hotel room less than 3 miles from my apartment. About the mathematical improbability of coincidence stacked upon coincidence until it stops being coincidence and starts being something else. The lights flicker again. I don't look up anymore. I've accepted that something in this room is trying to get my attention, and I'm deliberately ignoring it because acknowledging it would mean acknowledging that reality is more permeable than I've spent my entire career pretending. I move to examine her brain. The cranial autopsy is always the most invasive part of the procedure, the part that makes even experienced medical examiners pause. There's something viscerally disturbing about opening a skull, about physically handling the organ that housed consciousness and personality and everything that made a person who they were. I make the coronal incision, scalp peeling back with the sound of tearing fabric. The striker saw screams as it cuts through bone. And that's when I find it. Tucked behind her right ear, hidden beneath hair and skin, is a scar. Small, surgical, precise. I almost miss it in the blood-stained tangle of tissue. But when I expose it fully, I recognize what I'm looking at. It's a craniotomy scar. Old. Maybe 30 years old. The kind of scar left by pediatric neurosurgery. My hand goes to my own head. To the spot behind my left ear. To the scar I've had since I was 15, when they operated to remove a benign tumor pressing against my auditory nerve. The scar I've explained 1,000 times to curious friends and nervous dates and medical students who notice it when I'm showing them proper autopsy technique. She has the same scar. Mirror image. Right side instead of left. But the same location. The same size. The same pattern of surgical staples that healed into smooth, silvery tissue. Twins often mirror each other, not just in appearance but in biology, in predispositions to disease, in the places where their bodies carry weakness or strength. If I had a tumor on my auditory nerve, it's not impossible that she would have had one too. Not impossible that she would have needed the same surgery. But the odds... Christ, the odds. I'm not a religious man. 37 years and the morgue burns religion out of you, or transforms it into something too abstract to be useful. I've seen too many children on my table. Too many good people killed by random chance. Too many monsters who died peacefully in their sleep. If there's a God, he doesn't intervene in the places I work. He doesn't stop needles from piercing veins or bullets from finding hearts or cancer from eating through tissue that wanted nothing more than to keep living. But standing here, looking at this scar, I feel something that might be divine intervention or might be the cruelest joke the universe has ever played. Because if this woman is my twin, and every piece of evidence I've collected tonight suggests she is, then my entire life is built on a lie. My parents didn't lose a child. They gave one away. And the child they gave away spent her life in the spaces I never had to see. In foster care, probably. In group homes. On streets where survival meant selling pieces of yourself until there was nothing left to sell. She found me. Somehow, through whatever constellation of chance and determination and obsession drives people to search for their origins, she found me. She learned my name. She tattooed it on her arm like a prayer or a curse or an accusation. She came to my city. And then she killed herself. The question that's been forming since I first saw that birthmark finally crystallizes into something I can articulate, Did she kill herself because she found me, or because she didn't find me in time? The morgue's phone rings. The sound is sharp and intrusive, a violation of the heavy silence that settled over the examination room. I don't answer it. Whoever's calling can leave a message, can wait until morning, can deal with bureaucracy and paperwork and all the administrative machinery that processes death into data. I'm busy. I'm standing over my sister's body, holding her brain in my hands, trying to reconcile 37 years of professional detachment with the sudden, overwhelming knowledge that some bodies aren't just cases. Some bodies are family. The phone stops ringing. The silence returns. And in that silence, I hear it again. Not a voice this time. A sound. Soft, rhythmic, coming from somewhere behind me. It takes me a moment to identify it. Dripping water. But there's no sink running. No leak in the ceiling. No source for water to drip. I turn slowly. The sound is coming from the refrigeration compartments. From the drawer where the suicide by hanging is stored. I walk toward it, my shoes squeaking on the tile floor. The dripping gets louder as I approach. Not faster. Just louder. As if whatever's producing this sound wants to make sure I hear it. I pull open the drawer. The body inside is unchanged. Male, 63, rope burns around his neck, tongue protruding slightly from between his lips. But there's water pooling beneath him. Clear water, flowing from nowhere, soaking into the body bag, dripping through the drainage holes in the compartment floor. I close the drawer. Open the next one. The elderly man who died in his sleep. He's unchanged too. But there's water here as well. Not a lot. Just a thin film coating the bottom of the drawer, cold and inexplicable. I close that drawer. Stand there in the fluorescent light, trying to understand what I'm seeing. Water in the morgue isn't unusual. Condensation happens. Refrigeration creates moisture. But this is different. This water is appearing spontaneously, accumulating in places it shouldn't, following no logical pattern of condensation or leakage. Unless it's not water at all. Unless I'm finally breaking. Unless 37 years of this work has finally exceeded my brain's capacity to process trauma, and what I'm seeing is the first symptom of a complete psychological collapse. Hallucinations. Delusions. The mind's desperate attempt to create meaning from meaninglessness. I walk back to my sister's body, to the examination table, to the clinical reality of flesh and bone and tissue that can be measured and weighed and documented. I've completed the autopsy. I have everything I need for my report. Cause of death, combined drug intoxication. Manner of death, suicide. Identity, unknown pending fingerprint analysis and missing person database searches. But I'm not going to file that report. Not yet. Because there's one more thing I need to do. One more violation of protocol that will probably cost me my license if anyone finds out. But I've already come this far. I've already crossed lines I can't uncross. What's one more transgression in a night full of them? I take her fingerprints. Standard procedure. But instead of running them through the usual databases, I run them through a private genealogy service. One of those companies that promises to connect you with long-lost relatives, that builds family trees from DNA and fingerprints and the digital exhaust of human existence. It's not admissible in court. It's probably not even legal. But it works. The results take 17 minutes. 17 minutes during which I clean my instruments, document my findings, photograph the incisions, do all the mechanical tasks that let me pretend I'm still a professional instead of a man whose entire identity is unraveling. When the results come back, they're conclusive. Sibling match. 99.7% probability. Her name, the name she was given after adoption, was Sarah Grace Mitchell. born February 12, 1980, in Boston City Hospital. Adopted at 3 days old by Robert and Patricia Mitchell of Somerville, Massachusetts. Removed from their care at age 6 due to neglect. Placed in foster care. 16 different homes in 12 years. Emancipated at 18. Arrest record starting at 19. Possession. Prostitution. Petty theft. The standard trajectory of someone the system chewed up and spit out. Last known address, Seattle, Washington. That was 3 years ago. After that, nothing. No arrests. No hospital records. No digital footprint at all. She disappeared into the invisible population of addicts and homeless people, the ones who exist in the spaces between social services, who survive by staying off radar, who die without anyone knowing they're gone. Except she didn't die in obscurity. She died 3 miles from my apartment, wearing my mother's necklace, with my name tattooed on her arm. I print the genealogy report, fold it, put it in my pocket. Then I do something I've never done in 37 years of conducting autopsies. I lie in my official report. I document the physical findings accurately, the overdose, the internal damage, the surgical scar. But I list the manner of death as undetermined. I note that toxicology is pending. I recommend further investigation. I don't mention the birthmark. I don't mention the necklace. I don't mention the tattoo or the genealogy results or any of the evidence that points to this woman being someone I should have known existed. Because if I document it, it becomes real in a way I'm not prepared to handle. It becomes official. It becomes part of the permanent record, the story that will be told about my family and my parents and the choices they made 45 years ago. And some stories, I'm learning, are better left unwritten. I close the examination room at 6:47 a.m., just as the first forensic techs are arriving for the day shift. They nod at me in the hallway, used to seeing me leaving as they're arriving, used to my preference for the night shift and its solitude. They don't ask about the case I've been working on. Don't notice the way my hands are trembling slightly, or the fact that I've been in the morgue for 11 hours straight without a break. I drive home through streets still dark with winter morning. The city is quiet at this hour, suspended in that liminal space between night and day, between the people who never sleep and the people who are just waking up. I park in my usual spot, take the elevator to my apartment on the 7th floor, unlock my door, step inside. Everything is exactly as I left it. Kitchen clean, dishes drying in the rack, coffee maker programmed to start at 7 a.m. Living room neat, medical journals stacked on the side table, television off. Bedroom dark, bed made with hospital corners, the habit of a man who spent years in military medical training before transitioning to civilian forensics. But it feels different now, contaminated somehow by knowledge I can't unknow, by the presence of a ghost I didn't know I had. I don't sleep. I sit in my kitchen as the sun comes up, drinking coffee that tastes like ash, staring at the genealogy report spread out on the table in front of me. Sarah Grace Mitchell, my sister, my twin, the girl who should have grown up next to me, sharing a room and toys and the 1,000 small moments that build sibling relationships. Instead, she grew up alone, unwanted, failed by every system that was supposed to protect her, and I lived the life she should have had. The stable home, the education, the career, the privileges of being the child they kept instead of the child they gave away. There's a concept in psychology called survivor's guilt. It's what happens when you survive something that killed others, when you walk away from trauma that destroyed people you knew. I've seen it in military veterans, in accident survivors, in the families of suicide victims. The irrational but overwhelming sense that your survival was somehow stolen from someone more deserving. I never had survivor's guilt before, but sitting here now, Looking at my sister's mugshots and the arrest records, seeing the progression from fresh-faced teenager to hollow-eyed addict, I understand it. I survived our birth by being born first, by being chosen, by some arbitrary decision my parents made about which baby they could afford to keep. And that decision cost Sarah everything. My phone buzzes. Work email. The toxicology results are back, faster than usual, probably because it was such an obvious overdose case. Fentanyl. Alcohol. Diphenhydramine. Exactly what I expected to find. Levels consistent with intentional overdose. The medical examiner's office will want my final report by end of day. I should write it. Should finish this case and move on to the next one, the way I've moved on from 11,000 cases before. Should maintain the professional detachment that's kept me sane, or approximation of sane, for 37 years. But instead, I open my laptop and start searching. Missing person reports from the Boston area, 1980 to present. Foster care records, as much as I can access without legal authorization. News articles about adoption agencies in Massachusetts. I'm looking for something, anything, that can tell me the rest of Sarah's story. The parts between birth and death. The 45 years that should have intersected with mine but never did. I find fragments. A police report from when she was 12, found sleeping in a park after running away from her foster home. A high school transcript showing straight A's for 2 semesters, then nothing, dropped out. A newspaper article about a drug bust that mentions her name in passing, one of 17 people arrested, charges eventually dropped. The digital breadcrumbs of a life lived in the margins. And then I find something that makes my breath catch. A blog post. Written 8 months ago on a recovery forum, one of those online spaces where addicts and former addicts share their stories anonymously, looking for community and understanding in places they can't find in the physical world. The username is WanderSG. The post is titled Looking for My Twin. I was adopted. The post begins. Told my whole life that my birth mother couldn't keep me, that it was better this way, that some people aren't meant to be parents. I spent years being angry about it. Years blaming her for giving me away, for choosing her own life over mine. But now I'm sober, 63 days today, and I'm trying to understand instead of blame. I'm trying to imagine what it must have been like for her. 19 years old. Twins. No money. No support. Having to choose which baby to keep and which to give away. The post continues. I found records. Hospital records from when I was born. And there's something they never told me. I have a twin brother. He was born 7 minutes before me. And according to the records, he went home with our birth mother. She kept him. She gave me away. I've spent the last 3 months trying to find him. I know his name, Marcus Webb. I know he's a doctor in Portland. I know he probably doesn't even know I exist, because why would our mother tell him about the daughter she gave away? But I need to meet him. I need to know if he remembers anything. If she ever talked about me. If anyone ever wondered where I was. I'm scared though. What if I find him and he doesn't want to know me? What if I'm just a reminder of something painful, something his family worked hard to forget? What if reaching out to him ruins his life the way mine has been ruined? The post ends there. No follow-up. No update about whether she found me. Except she did find me. She knew where I worked. She came to my city. And instead of reaching out, instead of knocking on my door or calling the medical examiner's office or leaving a note, she killed herself in a hotel room and let me find her the only way she knew I would, on my examination table. It's a message. The most horrible, tragic message a person can send. She wanted me to know she existed. She wanted to force me to see her, to acknowledge her, to know that while I was building my career and my life and my comfortable existence, she was out there suffering. She wanted me to understand that my survival came at a cost, that someone paid for my stability with their pain. And now I know. Now I carry that knowledge, and I have no idea what to do with it. The morning light fills my apartment. Outside, the city wakes up. People go to work. Children go to school. Life continues in its mundane, relentless way, indifferent to the small tragedies that happen in morgues and hotel rooms and anywhere else people die alone. I should shower, should change clothes, should go back to the office and file my report and move on. But I can't move. I'm frozen in my kitchen chair, staring at Sarah's blog post, reading her words over and over. She was sober. 63 days. She was trying. She was reaching out. She was looking for connection, for family, for something to anchor her to the world. And she found nothing but me. A stranger who shares her DNA but not her life. A brother who didn't know she existed. A man who spent his career cutting open bodies and documenting death but never once asked himself whose deaths he was documenting, whose tragedies he was reducing to paperwork and toxicology reports. There's a sound in my apartment. Not loud, just a soft shifting, like fabric moving. I look up. The curtains in my living room are moving slightly, even though the windows are closed and there's no breeze. They sway back and forth, a gentle rhythm that should be soothing but instead sets my nerves on edge. Because I've seen this before. In the morgue, the inexplicable movements, the shadows that have weight, the sense of being watched by something that shouldn't be there. I stand up slowly, walk toward the curtains, pull them back. There's nothing there. Just the window. Just the view of the city stretching out below me, ordinary and indifferent. But when I turn back to the kitchen, I see it. On the table, next to the genealogy report. Something that wasn't there before. It's a photograph. Old. Polaroid. The colors faded to that distinctive yellow-brown tint of pictures from the 1980s. And in the photograph is my mother. Younger than I ever remember seeing her. Maybe 20 years old. She's sitting in a hospital bed, holding two babies. One in each arm. Both wrapped in identical white blankets. Both sleeping peacefully against her chest. Twins. Me and Sarah. Together. The moment before we were separated. The last time we existed in the same space, connected by the same mother, unaware that in a few hours our paths would diverge forever. I don't remember this photograph. I've never seen it before. It shouldn't be here, in my apartment, appearing spontaneously on my kitchen table. But it is. I pick it up with shaking hands. Turn it over. On the back, in my mother's handwriting, faded but still legible, is a single sentence. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. The photograph falls from my fingers. And in the silence of my apartment, I hear it again. That voice. Soft, feminine, barely audible. Brother. I didn't go back to work that day. I called in sick for the first time in 8 years, letting my voicemail inform my supervisor that I was dealing with a personal emergency and would return as soon as possible. I spent the day in my apartment, alternating between staring at the photograph and researching everything I could find about adoption in 1980s Massachusetts, about the laws and procedures and systems that allowed parents to split up twins without consequence. It happened more often than I expected. Not regularly, but often enough that there were support groups for separated twins, academic studies on the psychological impact of being raised apart, even a documentary I watched on my laptop while the sun tracked across my living room floor. The documentary showed twins who found each other in their 30s, their 40s, their 50s. Some of them were eerily similar, same gestures, same laugh, same career choices despite being raised in completely different environments. Others were strangers who happened to share DNA, struggling to build connection across the vast gulf of different lived experiences. All of them said the same thing. Finding each other felt like finding a piece of themselves they didn't know was missing, like suddenly understanding why they'd always felt incomplete. I never felt incomplete, not consciously, but watching those reunions, seeing the way these twins looked at each other with recognition and wonder and grief for all the years they had lost, I started to notice the negative space in my own life, the way I'd always been a solitary person, the way relationships never quite stuck, friendships never quite deepened beyond surface pleasantness, the way I'd chosen a career that kept me isolated, working night shifts with the dead instead of day shifts with the living. Was that because of Sarah? Some biological imprinting, some cellular memory of being torn from my twin that made every subsequent relationship feel insufficient? Or was I just reading patterns into randomness, creating narratives to explain the ordinary loneliness of being human? The photograph sat on my kitchen table, accusing me. My mother holding both of us. The last moment we were whole. I tried calling my father. He's 78 now, living in a retirement community in Florida, spending his days playing golf and avoiding any topic more serious than the weather. He didn't answer. I left a voicemail that was deliberately vague. Need to talk about family history. Give me a call when you can, and then sat by my phone waiting for a response that didn't come. At midnight, I gave up. Made coffee even though I knew I wouldn't sleep. Sat at my kitchen table and started writing. Not my official report. Something else. A letter. To Sarah. To the sister I never met. To the ghost that was haunting my apartment with photographs and whispers and the weight of accusation. Dear Sarah, I wrote. I don't know if you can hear this. I don't know if anything survives death except the body and the grief it leaves behind. But I need to say this anyway. I need you to know that I didn't know. I didn't know you existed. I didn't know that my comfortable life was built on your absence. I didn't know that while I was going to medical school and becoming a doctor and building a career around understanding death, you were living a life that was death in slow motion. I stopped writing. Started again. Yet you were trying to tell me something by dying in my city, by letting me find you on my examination table. I don't know what it was. Were you asking for acknowledgement? For justice? For someone to finally see you and understand that your life mattered, that you were more than just another overdose statistic? I see you now. I see you, Sarah. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry I didn't find you first. I'm sorry our mother made the choice she made. I'm sorry the systems that were supposed to protect you failed over and over again. I'm sorry your life was hard and painful and cut short by desperation. And I'm sorry that this letter is too late. That you're already gone. That all I can offer you now is words on paper that you'll never read. I signed it. Folded it. And then I did something that would have gotten me committed if anyone had seen me. I took the letter to my building's courtyard, where the Residents Association maintains a small garden. I dug a hole in the frozen ground with my hands, tearing my knuckles on rocks and roots. And I buried the letter there. A funeral for a sister I never had a chance to know. When I came back to my apartment, the photograph was gone from my kitchen table. So was the genealogy report. In their place was a single white feather. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking I'm having a breakdown. That the stress of this discovery has fractured my grip on reality, and what I'm interpreting as supernatural intervention is actually just dissociative symptoms. My own mind creating meaning for meaninglessness, finding patterns in chaos, seeing ghosts where there's only grief. You might be right, but the feather was real. I picked it up, held it. It was soft and light and undeniably physical. And when I looked at my kitchen table, I saw that it was lying exactly where the photograph had been. Centered, deliberate, placed there by someone or something that wanted me to find it. I kept it. put it in an empty prescription bottle and set it on my dresser, next to my watch and keys and all the other mundane objects that anchor me to routine and normalcy. Then I did sleep. Finally. Fell into it more than chose it, my body shutting down from exhaustion and emotional overload. And I dreamed. In the dream, I was 7 years old again, standing at the top of the stairs at our old house on Maple Street. But this time, when I heard my parents arguing in the kitchen, I walked down instead of going back to bed. I walked through the living room, past the couch where I used to read comic books, past the television where we watched Saturday morning cartoons. I walked into the kitchen. My parents were there. Younger. My mother still in her 30s, my father with a full head of hair and no reading glasses. They were sitting at the kitchen table, and between them was a baby. Not me. Sarah. I knew it was Sarah even though I'd never seen her. Even though in waking life I had no idea what she looked like as an infant. In the dream, I just knew. My mother was crying. I can't do it, she said. I can't give her away. My father reached across the table and took her hand. We talked about this, Maggie. We can't afford two. We can barely afford one. This is the right choice. There's no right choice, my mother said. There's only choosing which child to hurt. Dream Me walked closer, stood next to the table, looked down at baby Sarah. She was awake, staring up at me with dark eyes. And even though she was only a few days old, even though babies that young aren't supposed to be able to focus or recognize faces, she saw me, really saw me. And she reached up one tiny hand, grasping at air, trying to touch me. I reached back. Our fingers were inches apart. And then my father stood up, blocking my view, and said, "Marcus, go back to bed." I woke up with tears on my face and the certainty that the dream was memory disguised as imagination. That I had been there, in some way I couldn't consciously recall, when they made the decision to give Sarah away. That some part of me had known all along that I was incomplete. It was 4 a.m. I got up, showered, dressed, drove to the morgue even though I wasn't scheduled to work, used my key to let myself in, walked through the dark hallways to the examination room where Sarah's body was still stored, waiting for final disposition now that my report was complete. I pulled open her drawer, looked at her one more time, her face peaceful in death, finally free from the pain that had defined her life. I wanted to apologize again, wanted to say all the things I'd written in that letter, but words felt insufficient. So instead, I did something else, something that would violate every professional protocol and probably several laws. I took a syringe, drew blood from her femoral artery. She still had blood despite the autopsy, pooled in the lower extremities, cold but not yet fully coagulated. And then I went to the morgue's laboratory. I spent 3 hours extracting and sequencing her DNA. It's not something we do routinely. DNA analysis is expensive and time-consuming, usually reserved for criminal cases or identity confirmation. But I had the skills and the equipment and the desperate need to prove to myself that this was real, that she was real, that I hadn't imagined this entire thing. The results confirmed what I already knew. Full sibling match. Same mother, same father. Genetic markers showing we'd shared a womb, developed together for 9 months before being born into a world that immediately separated us. I printed the results, added them to my personal file of Sarah's documentation, the genealogy report I'd made copies of before it disappeared, screenshots of her blog post, the arrest records, everything I could find about who she was and how she lived and why she died. I was building a case file, evidence, proof that she'd existed, that she mattered, that she was more than just Jane Doe on Morgue slab. And then I realized what I was actually doing. I was trying to resurrect her. Not literally, but in the way that stories resurrect people, in the way that documentation creates a kind of immortality. I was trying to give her the acknowledgement in death that she'd never gotten in life. The morgue was silent around me. 7 a.m. Soon the day shift would arrive. Soon I'd have to pretend to be normal, to be the competent professional everyone expected. But for now, in this liminal hour between night and day, I sat in the laboratory with my sister's DNA results and felt the full weight of everything she'd lost. 45 years. That's what she'd lost. 45 years of knowing she had a family, a twin, someone who shared her genetic code, and maybe, if things had been different, her life. 45 years of believing she was unwanted, given away, not good enough to keep. 45 years of trauma and survival and addiction and pain that eventually became too much to carry. And I lost 45 years too. I just hadn't known it until 3 days ago. There was a sound behind me. I turned. Nothing there. Just the empty laboratory, the humming equipment, the fluorescent lights that never quite warmed the space. But I felt it again. That presence. That sense of being watched by something that existed in the spaces between what I could see and what I could prove. "Sarah?" I said it out loud. My voice sounded strange in the silence, uncertain and small. No response. Not a voice. Not a whisper. But the air pressure changed slightly, the way it does before a storm, and I knew, in that irrational, animal way of knowing that bypasses logic entirely, that she'd heard me. "I'm going to tell them," I said, still talking to empty air, still addressing a ghost I couldn't prove existed. "I'm going to tell everyone who you were, your real name, that you were my sister, that Mom and Dad gave you away. I'm going to put it in the official report. I'm going to make sure you're not buried as Jane Doe. I'm going to." The lights went out. All of them. Simultaneously. The laboratory went completely dark, darker than it should have been even with no power, as if the darkness itself had weight and presence. I stood frozen, my hands gripping the edge of the lab table, my breath loud in my own ears. And then, in that darkness, I felt something I hadn't felt since I was a child. A hand. Small, cold, feminine, touching my left hand. Just for a moment. Just long enough for me to know it was real. The lights came back on. Slowly. Flickering. Stabilizing. I looked at my hand. There was nothing there. No mark. No evidence. Just my own skin, slightly paler than usual, gripping the table hard enough that my knuckles had gone white. But I felt it. That touch. That connection. That moment of acknowledgement from beyond whatever barrier separates the living from the dead. And I understood. She didn't want her story told. She didn't want to be exposed posthumously, turned into a cautionary tale or a news article or a family scandal. She'd spent her life being invisible, being overlooked, being the child who wasn't chosen. And maybe invisibility was the only thing she had left that was truly hers. So I made a different choice. I went back to my office. I'd filed my final report. Cause of death, combined drug intoxication. Manner of death, accident. Identity, Jane Doe, pending investigation. Recommendation, burial in county cemetery for unidentified deceased, with DNA samples stored for future identification if family comes forward. I didn't mention the birthmark, didn't mention the necklace, didn't mention any of the evidence I collected. Instead, I took all of it, the genealogy report, the DNA results, the photographs I'd found in the morgue security footage showing her in the hallway the night she died, everything, and I put it in a file box. Labeled it with case number and date. Took it home, and I buried it. Not literally, but I put it in the locked box in the back of my closet, the box where I keep the things I need to forget but can't quite throw away. birth certificates, divorce papers, letters from people I used to know, and now, evidence of a sister the world never acknowledged and a family secret that died with my mother. That was 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks since I found Sarah on my examination table. 3 weeks since my world cracked open and showed me the scaffolding of lies it was built on. 3 weeks of going through the motions of my job, conducting autopsies, filing reports, being the professional everyone expects. But the morgue feels different now. The shadows have more weight. The silence has more voice. And sometimes, while I'm alone on the night shift, I feel that presence again. Not threatening, not malicious. Just there, watching, waiting for me to acknowledge what I know but can't prove. I haven't told my father, haven't confronted him about the choice he and my mother made 45 years ago. What would be the point? They made a decision that seemed right at the time, under circumstances I can't fully understand. And they lived with the consequences of that decision, my mother's crying jags, her obsessive staring at pregnant women, the locked box in her closet that probably contained pictures of the daughter she gave away. They suffered too. Maybe not as much as Sarah suffered. But they carried their own guilt, their own grief, their own knowledge that they'd chosen one child's future over another's. And now I carry it too. The knowledge, the weight, the understanding that some choices echo forward through decades, shaping lives that haven't even started yet, creating suffering that compounds with interest until it becomes unbearable. I think about Sarah constantly. Not the body on my examination table, that's clinical memory, professional documentation, the kind of recall that doesn't hurt because it's distanced by technical language and procedure. I think about the other Sarah, the one in the blog post, the one who was 63 days sober and looking for her twin, the one who came to my city with hope in her heart and my mother's necklace around her neck. I think about what I would have said if she'd knocked on my door, if she'd called my office, if she found me before the despair found her. Would I have believed her? Would I have welcomed her into my life, this stranger with my face and my birthmark and my genetic code? Or would I have denied her, protected myself, chosen the comfortable lie of being an only child over the complicated truth of being a twin? I don't know. I'd like to think I would have been kind, that I would have listened, that I would have helped her. But I've seen enough of human nature in the morgue to know that people, even good people, often choose self-preservation over compassion, often choose the easy lie over the hard truth. Maybe she knew that. Maybe that's why she didn't reach out. Maybe she looked at my life, the medical degree, the career, the stability, and realized that I was living the life she should have had. And maybe that knowledge, that final confirmation that her suffering had purchased my success, was what pushed her over the edge from desperate to done. The photograph appeared again last week. Not the original, that's still missing, disappeared from my kitchen table that night like it was never real. But a different one. This time it showed up in my locker at work, tucked inside my jacket pocket where I know it wasn't when I hung up the jacket that morning. In this photograph, I was 2 years old. Birthday party. Cake with 2 candles. My mother holding me on her lap, smiling for the camera. But if you looked closely at her eyes, really looked, studied the image the way I study bodies for evidence of trauma, you could see the sadness there. The grief wearing the mask of celebration. She was thinking about Sarah. About the daughter who should have been in the picture too. About the birthday party that should have had 2 cakes, 2 sets of presents, 2 children blowing out candles together. I kept this photograph, put it in my wallet. So now, every time I need to show ID or pay for coffee or do any of the mundane transactions that make up a day, I see it. I see my mother's hidden grief. I see the ghost of the sister who should have been there. It's a kind of penance. A way of carrying Sarah with me. A way of acknowledging that my life was always built on absence, even when I didn't know it. The morgue hasn't had any more water incidents. The shadows are still shadows. The sounds are still sounds. But sometimes, when I'm doing an autopsy in the middle of the night, I find myself talking. Not to the body on the table, that's normal. Lots of medical examiners narrate their procedures out loud. It helps with documentation and focus. I'm talking to Sarah. I tell her about the cases I'm working on. About the drug overdoses that keep coming in, younger and younger, kids her age when she died and even younger. I tell her about the ones I couldn't save, not because it's my job to save them, they're already dead when they reach me, but because I couldn't find enough evidence to call their deaths suspicious, to trigger investigations that might have led to arrests, to justice. I tell her about the city, how it's changed since she was last here, how the hotel where she died has been torn down and replaced with condos that people like me can barely afford, how the streets she walked in her final days are being gentrified, cleaned up, made safe for the people who never had to survive on them. And sometimes, I apologize for not finding her sooner, for not being findable, for benefiting from the choice that destroyed her life, for being the twin who got to live while she got to survive. I don't expect forgiveness. Forgiveness is impossible when one party is dead and the other is talking to shadows. But the talking helps. It makes her real in a way that case files and DNA results can't. It keeps her present. It refuses to let her disappear completely into the bureaucratic machinery that processes unidentified bodies into dust. My lease is up next month. I'm thinking about moving. Not far, still in the city, still close to work, but somewhere different. Somewhere that doesn't have the ghost of my sister manifesting in photographs and feathers and the cold touch of invisible hands. Somewhere I can maybe sleep without dreaming of babies and kitchens and choices that echo forward through decades. But I don't think it will help. I think Sarah is less a ghost haunting specific locations and more a ghost haunting me. A truth I can't unknow. A piece of my identity that was always missing and is now found but irretrievable. You can't unfind your twin. You can't unlearn that your entire life is built on someone else's absence. So I'll probably stay. In this apartment. In this job. In this city where my sister died 3 miles from my home. Because leaving feels like abandoning her. And she's been abandoned enough. There's a concept in quantum physics. I learned about it from a physicist whose suicide I autopsied 2 years ago, found the textbooks in his apartment, read them trying to understand what drives a mind to kill itself, called quantum entanglement. 2 particles, created together, remain connected no matter how far apart they are. What happens to one instantly affects the other, faster than light, across any distance. Twins are like that. Or so the research suggests. Connected in ways that bypass normal causation. They feel each other's pain. They sense each other's emotions. They remain entangled even when separated by continents or decades or the impermeable barrier between life and death. I think I've always felt Sarah. Not consciously. Not in a way I could name or explain. But in the emptiness I filled with work, in the relationships I sabotaged before they could get too close, in the choice to spend my life with the dead instead of the living. I was responding to her absence the way amputees respond to phantom limbs, the body insisting that something should be there even when evidence says it isn't. And now that I know she existed, now that I've touched her body and read her words and felt her cold hand in the darkness of my laboratory, the phantom becomes real. The absence becomes presence. The twin I never knew I had becomes the sister I'm mourning. Grief is strange when you're grieving someone you never knew. It's not like losing a spouse or a parent or a friend, people whose absence creates a hole in your daily life, whose missing shapes are defined by all the memories you shared. Sarah and I shared nothing. No memories. No experiences. No inside jokes or old arguments were quiet moments of understanding. We shared only DNA and a womb and 45 years of parallel lives that never intersected. And yet I grieve her. I grieve the relationship we could have had. I grieve the childhood we should have shared. I grieve the person she might have become if she'd been given the chances I was given. I grieve all the futures that were stolen from her by a decision made before she could speak or walk or fight back. The morgue is closing in 20 minutes. End of my shift. Soon the day team will arrive, cheerful and caffeinated, ready to face another day of death with the resilient optimism of people who still believe their job matters. I used to be like that. I used to think that understanding death was a noble pursuit, that documenting trauma and finding causes and providing closure to families was meaningful work. Now I just think it's accounting. We're accountants of mortality, tallying up the dead, filing them into categories, turning tragedy into data. We don't bring anyone back. We don't prevent the next death. We just document that it happened and try to explain why. Sarah's death certificate is filed now. Jane Doe, buried in the county cemetery, plot number 847, no marker because no one paid for one. I could pay for one. I have money. I could order a headstone with her real name, with her birth date and death date, with some epitaph that acknowledges she was loved even though she probably never felt it. But that feels wrong. Like claiming her in death when I failed her in life. Like pretending we had a relationship when we were strangers connected only by biology and bad luck. So her grave stays unmarked. Another body in the potter's field, the place where cities bury their forgotten people. Addicts. Homeless. Mentally ill. All the ones who died without anyone to claim them, without anyone to remember their names. I visit sometimes. Not often. Once a week, maybe. I bring flowers even though no one knows which plot is hers except me. I stand there in the rain or sun or snow and I talk to the ground the way I talk to shadows in the morgue. Apologizing. Explaining. Trying to make sense of something that will never make sense. Last week, I saw a woman there. Young, maybe 30. Standing a few plots away. She had track marks on her arms. She was crying, and when I looked at her face, I saw Sarah. Not literally, this woman was alive, her eyes moving and her chest rising and falling with breath. But she had the same expression Sarah must have had in her final hours. The same exhaustion. The same knowledge that the world has beaten you and there's no fight left. I wanted to talk to her. To tell her, what? That it gets better? That's a lie, obviously. For people like Sarah, for people living on streets and in shelters and in the spaces between social services, it doesn't get better. It gets harder, more painful, more hopeless. So I didn't say anything. I just stood there, 20 feet away, watching her cry over a grave that probably held someone like Sarah. Someone she loved or knew or identified with. Someone whose death confirmed what she already knew, that people like them don't get happy endings. She left before I did. Walked away down the gravel path, hunched against the wind, headed back to whatever life she was surviving. I watched her go, and I wondered if Sarah had stood in cemeteries like this, crying over graves of people who died the same way she would eventually die. If she'd seen her own future written in those unmarked plots and kept walking anyway because what else was there to do? The morgue is empty now. Just me and the refrigeration units and the eternal fluorescent hum. I should go home. Should sleep. Should pretend that tomorrow will be different from today even though I know it won't be. More bodies. More autopsies. More documentation of death that changes nothing. But before I leave, I do one more thing. I go to my office and I open my computer and I start a file. Private. Encrypted. Never to be shared with anyone except maybe someone years from now who might wonder why Dr. Marcus Webb retired early, why he left medicine, why he spent his final years working at a nonprofit that helped recovering addicts find housing and jobs and hope. In this file, I write Sarah's story. Not the clinical story, the overdose, the autopsy findings, the toxicology results. The real story. Or as much of it as I can piece together from arrest records and blog posts and foster care fragments and the 37 years of silence I lived in while she suffered. I write about the choice my parents made. About the girl who grew up in 16 foster homes. About the woman who got sober for 63 days and looked for her twin. About the body I found on my examination table with my birthmark and my mother's necklace and my name tattooed on her arm. I write about the ghost who haunts my morgue and my apartment in my life. About photographs that appear and disappear. About cold hands touching mine in the darkness. About the certainty, irrational but unshakable, that some part of Sarah survived death because some part of her was always connected to me, entangled at the quantum level, unable to fully disappear as long as I remember she existed. I write about guilt and grief and the unbearable weight of surviving when your twin didn't. About the privilege that looks like merit and the suffering that looks like choices when it's really just bad luck and worse systems. About the way society discards people who need help and then blames them for being discarded. And I write about the question I can't answer. What do I do now? How do I live with this knowledge? How do I continue going through the motions of my comfortable life when every comfort is built on Sarah's absence? How do I cut open bodies and document death when every body reminds me of the one body I should have known but didn't? I don't have answers. I just have questions and shadows and a file that grows longer every night I spend in this office, typing words that no one will read, confessing to a sister who can't hear me, trying to build a memorial out of language because it's the only thing I know how to do. The sun is coming up. I can see it through my office window, pale light breaking over the city, illuminating buildings and streets and all the places where people are waking up to lives that make sense. Lives where they know who they are and where they came from and who they're supposed to be. I used to have that. Used to be Dr. Marcus Webb, medical examiner, rational and competent and certain of my place in the world. Now I don't know what I am. Brother to a ghost. Survivor of a choice I didn't make. Keeper of a secret that keeps finding new ways to reveal itself. The file on my computer is 7,000 words now. Growing longer. Becoming something between confession and testimony. Something that might, eventually, help me understand what happened and why and what I'm supposed to do with the rest of my life now that I know the truth. But understanding hasn't come yet. Just more questions. Just more shadows. Just the certainty that Sarah is still here somehow, still watching, still waiting for me to do something that acknowledges her existence meant something. I close the file. Shut down my computer. Lock my office door. Walk out of the morgue into the cold morning air. The city is waking up around me. Coffee shops opening. Buses running their routes. People heading to jobs that make sense, that have clear purposes, that don't require them to confront the fundamental unfairness of existence. I get in my car. Drive home. Park in my usual spot. Take the elevator to the 7th floor. Unlock my door. Step inside, and there, on my kitchen table, is another photograph. This one showing 2 children, maybe 8 years old. A boy and a girl. Twins. Identical poses, identical smiles, identical expressions of pure childhood joy. The boy is me. I recognize the photo from my childhood album, the one my mother kept on the bookshelf, the documentation of my ordinary, privileged, chosen life. But the girl isn't in my childhood album. The girl is Sarah, or what Sarah might have looked like if she'd been given the same childhood I was given, if she'd been kept instead of given away. If the choice had been different, the photograph shouldn't exist. It's not a real memory, it's a fabrication, a digital manipulation, ghost's way of showing me what should have been, what we were supposed to be. I pick it up, stare at it, at the two children who share a face and a smile and a moment that never actually happened, at the life we should have lived together, at the parallel timeline where different choices led to different outcomes and Sarah got to be happy. And I understand, finally, what Sarah has been trying to tell me through all these manifestations, through photographs and feathers and cold touches in the darkness. She's not angry. She's not accusing. She's not demanding justice or revenge or even acknowledgement. She's just showing me what was lost. Not just her life, but our life together. The relationship we never got to have. The childhood we should have shared. The twin connection that was severed before it could form. She's showing me the ghost of a life that never was. And asking me, maybe begging me, to remember it anyway. To hold space for the relationship we didn't have. To mourn not just what she lost, but what we both lost. I sit at my kitchen table, holding this impossible photograph, and I cry for the first time since I was a child. I cry for Sarah, for her hard life and her painful death and her desperate search for a brother who didn't know she existed. I cry for my parents and the impossible choice they made and the guilt they must have carried. I cry for myself, for the life I lived in ignorance, for the twin I never got to know. And I cry for the ghost of what should have been. For the children in this photograph who never existed. For the life we should have lived together. For every moment we were denied because of a choice made in 1980 by two people who thought they were doing the right thing. The photograph stays on my table. I don't put it away. I don't hide it. I let it sit there as evidence that some truths are too big to bury, that some relationships exist even when they never actually happened, that some ghosts are memories of futures that never came to be. Because what happened that night in the morgue, what I discovered when I examined that overdose victim and checked her birthmark and realized it was my twin sister I thought died at birth, that didn't end with her death or my investigation or the file I keep hidden in my closet. It's still happening. Every day. Every time I see her face in the mirror or feel her presence in the shadows or find another photograph appearing where it shouldn't be. Every time I cut open a body and wonder if someone, somewhere, is mourning their absence the way I'm mourning Sarah's. Every time I remember that I'm not who I thought I was, that my identity is built on absence and lies and choices I didn't make. The morgue still calls me. There are bodies waiting. Cases to document, death to account for and explain, and I'll go back, tomorrow, or the next day, or whenever I can stop crying and put on my professional face and pretend that finding my dead twin on my examination table didn't fundamentally break me. But I'm different now. The work is different now. Every body is potentially someone's missing sibling, someone's lost twin, someone's ghost waiting to be acknowledged. And I approach each one with more care, more respect, more awareness that these aren't just cases. They're people. They're stories. They're the evidence of choices and systems and bad luck that led to this final, cold table. I'm different now. And Sarah, my sister, my twin, my ghost, is part of why. She found me. Not in life, when it could have mattered, but in death, when all I can offer is witness and memory and the promise that she won't be forgotten, that she won't be just another Jane Doe in the county cemetery, that someone knows her name and her story and the injustice of her life. I know. I remember. I carry her with me. And in the shadows of my apartment, in the flickering lights of my morgue, in the space between what I can prove and what I feel, I think she knows that. I think she's at peace now, or as close to peace as ghosts can get. But me? I'm not at peace. I'm haunted, permanently, by the sister I never knew and the life we never shared and the question that will follow me until my own death. What if they made a different choice? What if they kept both of us? What if? Those questions don't have answers. They're just ghosts themselves. Echoes of alternate timelines. Shadows of possibilities that never materialized. But they're mine now. Just like Sarah is mine now. Just like this grief and this guilt and this unbearable knowledge of everything that was lost. The photograph sits on my kitchen table. 2 children who were never together. Smiling at a camera that never existed. Living in a moment that should have been real but wasn't. I leave it there. I leave them there. The ghosts of what should have been. The children we were supposed to be. Because what happened that night in the morgue came back. Not as horror. Not as terror. But as truth. Unwanted, undeniable, unavoidable truth. And truth, I'm learning, is harder to live with than any ghost. The sun is fully up now. The city is awake. Life continues. And somewhere, in the morgue's refrigerators, in the county cemetery's unmarked graves, in the shadows that follow me, in the quantum entanglement that binds twins even after death, Sarah is still there. Still watching. Still waiting. Still my sister. Finally. Tragically. Forever.